Today on Idiot with a Library Card, I'm going to talk about Solon or Cylon. I've heard two different pronunciations. He is, or was, a Athenian leader, set up a constitution, and saved the city-state from collapse and disaster. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I can go over what he did in Athens. This is interesting. I'm more going over with what he talks to the king of the Lydians, which was an ancient civilization, I believe, based around Turkey. One of the first targets of the Persian Empire when its rise came under Cyrus the Great. So, Solon fixes the Athenian constitution and government. There were a lot of problems, mostly like debt servitude was becoming a huge problem, and a lot of the poor people were ending up going into slavery. They were going to rise up and kill all the rich people before Solon steps in. And he stepped in, he cleared all the debts, he changed some other rules. I know the one more famous one is you could only export olive oil, but you had to keep the grain in the city. You know, I'm a free trade guy, but who knows? It seems like it worked back then. And you know, these old stories, although Solon's appears in two primary sources that sort of corroborate the story. Now, they probably get their story from the same source. So Herodotus, in his first book, early on in the first book, goes over it, and then Plutarch in the Plutarch, if you don't know, writes biographies of ancient Romans and Greeks, and he writes a biography on Solon. It's short. Most of his biographies are pretty short, but he usually does one on the ancient Greeks and then the ancient Romans, and sort of he'll do one Greek, one Roman that sort of have similar backgrounds, and then do a comparison of what their lives are, and usually fits in some moral lesson there. Solon fixes the Athenian government, and what he does is, and you've seen this with other people, Sulla in a much bloodier way, but similar fashion does something similar and I can think of like George Washington does this too, where he gets power, he fixes the things he needs to fix, and then he leaves. Solon, didn't just retire, though, like Washington and Sulla. He left. He left the country. He exiled himself for 10 years, and he said, keep these changes for 10 years, and then you can change the Constitution. Now, that strategy didn't work, because after about 5 or 6 years, things went sort of back to normal, and the Athenians started having problems, like upper crusty families were constantly fighting each other, and that went back, and there were factions in the city. Solon sort of resolved that, but then, you know, factions always reappear when there's new power structures. It's just the people who like to be in power figure out how to get around the new rules and get themselves back into power. And then you have people who the new rules benefit who will get themselves into power. So, you know, it could have been seen, but there were other constitutionalists that came in and fixed the Athenian system. Solon was just the first step in sort of making it the representative democracy it became, and actually it became a pure democracy, and there's argument whether that was good for Athens or bad. It seems the pure democracy, everyone gets a vote, Athens, ends up being bad for them in a few cases. But, you know, that's for a political science expert to dissect, not an idiot with a library card. So I guess to get back on topic, I went off a bit there. So in both Herodotus' histories and Plutarch's lives, and in particular Plutarch's Life of Solon. He tells two stories to the king of the Lydians, and they're really interesting, and they have an interesting outlook. The first one I would call the Green Lantern speech to Spider-Man. If you've ever seen the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, yeah, it's hard to rectify what is the first Spider-Man movie, but I guess that would be the first Spider-Man movie. I guess they're on their third adaptation now. He tells them that you'll live long enough, you'll either die a hero or live long enough to become a villain. And the story sort of goes like that these two, there's a festival in town, and their mom wants to go, but she can't walk that far. And so what they do is they put her in a litter or a cart. Actually, I believe it's a cart. It's not a litter. It's a cart. And they pick up the cart. They don't have any oxen, and they carry her. They basically, like an oxen would pull a cart, they pull the cart into town. They go rest in the sanctuary for the goddess that they were celebrating, and they die. And this is supposed to be a great death. This is the best way to die. They are the happiest and the best type of people, Solon says to the king of the Lydians. And like me, you might go, it sounds like they took their mom into town and then exhausted themselves doing that. But what they did, and people saw them do this for their mother, and they honored them. They put statues in the temple for them, and you'll see even in modern temples that are still maintained, there are statues of these two sons. It's to show that they died right at the high point of their lives, when they did the best thing, when they were the most honorable people. And that, I think for us, in sort of a Judeo-Christian mindset, we don't look at honor that way. That honor is the greatest good. It's a good, but you can fall in love with it. Love of honor is pride, and a little pride's good, but too much pride is bad. And you could argue that these two brothers died of pride, but they did. It was the best thing they were going to do in their lives, and in Greek times that very well could have been true. And they died without ever having sullied that reputation. It's Batman saves the city and then dies. And there's no sort of backlash or the police getting Batman, or Batman punches someone too hard and they die. He interrupts a mugging and breaks the guy's neck, and he's in a wheelchair the rest of his life for what could be a felony, but not a crime deserving of that punishment. So I like it in a superhero sort of aspect, that like if you did something heroic and then died doing it, it would be better for you, for your family's reputation, and for your ongoing reputation, your forever honor. There wouldn't be then the bad stuff you did. I shouldn't even say bad stuff. There wouldn't be any other part of your life. It would be that you did this great and brave thing, and that would define you. And that not a big deal now, and not necessarily after you die, but it grows as some of us live quiet, normal lives, don't do anything brave that gets us killed. We're good people, but the next generation doesn't remember us, and the generation after that doesn't remember us. And that to Solon is sad, not necessarily sad, but it's not as great as doing something great and being honored for doing something great. And that is what those two brothers are honored for. And that's why it's the best kind of life, which is odd. It's a very short life. They have no posterity. It's good for their posterity as themselves. They go on. They live on as honorable people. There are statues made of them. So that's the good life. Now, the second thing he tells the king of Lydia, because the king of Lydia, wants him to say that he is living the best life and he is just great. He's super rich. Lydia is known as the first civilization to coin money. Not that that necessarily would make you like I guess a poor, well, probably not a poor country could come up with that, but a middling country certainly could. It's just that they came up with it, and they have a reputation from Herodotus and Plutarch and some of the other ancient writers as being this wealthy empire. So he talks to him a little more, and he says, but, yeah, maybe I won't be honored like that, and there will be books on me that say I did great things, but also point out the mistakes I made and the less honorable things I did. And that's sort of I like the Batman analogy where realistically, if there was a Batman, it would be he does all these great things, but occasionally he'll make a mistake or he'll let his anger get the best of him and maybe kill someone or over-regulate crime. What happens to Batman when there's no super criminals? Is he going after like the 16-year-old pot dealer? I mean, that's a podcast for what happens when Gotham City goes clean, which might be a note to self. I think it'll be an interesting podcast. Get interviews. So he says, well, look, I'm the richest man in the world. I mean, how could you think I'm not happy and in the best way? And basically what he tells him is he can't even really tell him if he's living the best life. He doesn't know him that well. And yeah, you're rich and a king, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're living the best life. And basically his point is wealth does not equal happiness. And this is something, unlike the old story that sort of shows the contrast of how we think in the West, modern West, and modern world, for that matter, has changed to how we think hasn't changed. And we still are always under the impression that wealth makes happiness. And it doesn't. Now, I'm not a very wealthy person, but I'm a very happy person. Poverty can lead to miserableness. Poverty doesn't make happiness. And he also makes that point. It's not, well, you could be hardly eating and still be happy. I mean, maybe you could, but it's much more difficult. But if your needs are being met, if your general health needs, if you have shelter and food that's good and drinkable water and some entertainment, and you're able to follow your passions to a certain point. Again, I'm not a very wealthy person. I'm able to do this, though. I have leisure time to do this. I have equipment to do this. I'm able to put it up on the internet. It's very fulfilling, and I can do other things that aren't my work that are very fulfilling. And my work can be fulfilling, too. And I'm not super wealthy, but that doesn't, maybe I'd win the lottery tomorrow, but, my parents could die the same day, and I'd be miserable, but wealthy. And some wealthy people have mental disorders and get addicted to drugs, have bad family lives, and that's the other thing I forgot to mention, which maybe I'll hear from that. I have a great family. And that's I have a great child, I have a great wife, I have great parents, and it really helps you, it makes you happy. And those things are more important than wealth. Because I've seen wealthier people with terrible families, and that's so much worse. It's such a strain. So I think there is a gap. It doesn't matter how much you have. It does. There's a certain threshold that I think you cross, and then it doesn't matter as much. Bill Gates may be happier than me. He may not. Not that happiness is the end all to be all to life, but some rich people live terrible lives, and that is the part of honor. Some rich people have trouble being honorable. I don't mean to rag on our president, but he he does some things that I would think would make him miserable. Constantly attacking people on Twitter seems like the move of an unhappy person. Now, he may be very happy and may just like doing that, but and even before he was president, he would do that, and I always thought that was a bit much. I don't hate Trump. Don't get off on this tangent, so we'll stop there. But okay, to quote Solon about this, what I've built up for the last 5 minutes, and this is in the middle of the sentence. Well, he sort of gives a preamble, and then he says, For the very rich man is not at all to be accounted more happy than he who has but his substance from day to day, unless also the fortune go with him of ending his life well in possession of all things fair. For many very wealthy men are not happy, while many who have but a moderate living are fortunate. And in truth, the very rich man who is not happy has two advantages, only as compared with the poor man who is fortunate. Whereas his latter has many as compared with the rich man who is not happy. The rich man is able to better fulfill his desire, and also to endure a great calamity, if it fall upon him, whereas the other has the advantage over him in these things which follow. He is not indeed able equally with the rich man to endure a calamity, or to fulfill his desire, but these his good fortune keeps away from him, while he is sound of limb, free from disease, untouched by suffering, the father of fair children, and himself of comely form. And if in addition to this he shall end his life well, he is worthy to be called that which thou seekest, namely a happy man. So, I guess fortunate is a better word for it. I mean, it does sound like he's saying better lucky than good. And although he says calamities don't fall them, I mean, calamities fall all of us, happen to all of us at some point. Where, people are going to die we love, and we're going to have financial stresses and unexpected problems. We'll lose our jobs and we'll go through trials. But that is also part of the beauty of life. And in this system, it's a little different in his time. I think it's easier to rise up and become better and wealthier and happier. We have more control over our lives than maybe any generation. And sometimes that does seem weird, because there are a lot more laws on the books, and sometimes you'll feel limited in what you can do. There's more people, there's more effect or there's less effect that you feel like you can make. But we have so many choices, and that can be overwhelming too, but we have so many choices and a great amount of freedom that we can be better every day. And so I love these looks into the ancient mind and how you can take some of these lessons that come from these works. I love Plutarch. Plutarch's great. It has some very weird moralizations of these characters, but it's always interesting to read him. History doesn't write like the history's much drier, and Herodotus and Plutarch add a little flavor. You're never going to read a modern biography like Plutarch's. There's much more moralizing and explanations of fate. They use the gods more, but sort of the explanation of portents, and it reads more like a novel. Now, the problem with that is it's probably less historically accurate, and certainly Herodotus has that issue too. But they read exciting, and ultimately you kind of get the gist of what happened anyway. Most of the things Herodotus writes, although incorrect, aren't outright lies. it happened something like this. And if it didn't, it happened for this reason, and you can, like, if you were writing a modern one for someone like Washington, and you would say, this man, he needed to constantly work. He needed to be hard-pressed and be a leader of men. And the second he lost that, that's why he died. Now, that would be a overstatement probably of how he died. He might have just been wary of life and worn down and died. His tooth health wasn't great. So, but you could make that read, and it would sort of make sense, and you'd explain that he died, like, I think it was a year after he was done being president. So I do love these works. I think they have lessons for us. Things like greed aren't going to fix your problems. But living an honorable life will be a good way to live. You should worry about how people will remember you to a certain degree, is, I think, the lesson from these two stories. And that happiness and the good life, because sometimes they're not connected. Sometimes a happy life, those two brothers weren't necessarily happy carrying their mom. That's how I'll tie it together, is that those two men that carried their mom on the cart and died probably weren't happy to do it, but it was the thing they were supposed to do, even though it killed them. And that is the good life. And that chasing money all the time or obsessing over things like money ends up just not isn't a guarantee to make you happy. It can help sometimes, and if you set a goal for financial gains and meet it, that can be great. So I would just say, ultimately, the point of the story is read these books. And you know what? What's nice about these old Greek books, all the sort of ancient Greek authors, is you don't need to read them. They're all free. I like archives.org, and they have a lot of them. But they port them over from a site called LibriVox, and you can find all sorts of free books there. You can download them to your MP3 player, listen to them while you're in the gym or in the car. Depending on what kind of work you do, you can listen to them at your work and get these great ancient lessons and great ancient wisdom for free on your MP3 player or iPhone. I still have a flip phone, so I don't know anything about that, but I'm sure you can get it on your mobile device if you use that as an MP3 player, if people still use MP3 players. I'm such an old man idiot with a library card. All right, well, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Probably about The Stand, another book I'm reading. Pretty interesting, but we'll see. All right, look forward to it. Thanks. Bye.